Yeah, so, what do you got now? You got a short story?
Yeah.
You're
this
what,
is-
sixth
this
grade,
is
you said?
Fairly short, and I call it I Remember, and this is a true story.
Okay, written about 50 years ago, when you were sixth grade?
Well, 50 years ago, it's longer ago than that.
I'm trying to
It's
be
over
nice.
60 years ago.
60 years ago?
Yeah. I call it I Remember. It was in October of 44, the last Friday of the month. I always remembered those last Friday because that's when all the mothers came to Parkdale School for PTA. Ma never missed PTA. This was a special Friday. The money the ladies made from that big quilt they raffled off was just enough to buy that new electric two-burner stove to replace the smelly kerosene stove out in the back hall. About the only time that old stove was used was to make coffee for PTA meetings and when the 7th and 8th graders had the taffy pull in December. Miss Anderson, our teacher, she let us off 15 minutes early that Friday, which suited me just fine. Got out of the last English class, always hated diagramming sentences, never made much sense to me. Who cares about prepositions and linking verbs, what Miss Anderson always called correct sentence structure, whatever that means? Well, I volunteered to dust off the erasers. That way I got to go out on the back porch. Sure was nice outside on that, better than that stuffy old schoolroom staring at that 8-day clock over the blackboard that never seemed to get to 3:30. Well, when I went back in, I passed through the back hall, and there stood that shiny new stove. I stopped to check it out, and I noticed in the center of each of the two burners there was a hole. Well, to make a long story short, I placed a 12-gauge shotgun shell down into that hole, and it just fit. And when I tried to retrieve it, it was stuck. I was just reaching in my pocket for my jackknife to pry it out when Miss Anderson came through the door, told me to get away from that stove before I ruined it. Then the bell rang, and I hurried home to help Pa with the chores. Ma left for PTA meeting, and I went down to the barn to throw down the hay and silage for the cows. Seemed like we just started milking when Ma came running in the barn, white as a ghost. Never saw Ma that excited before. Must have been something important. Well, she went on telling Pa that they put that big old blue speckled coffee pot on to brew, and they went back in Miss Anderson's room to set the table for lunch, and suddenly there was a big explosion. Ma said the whole school shook, and when they went out in the hallway, there was pieces of that stove strewn clear down all over, and that big blue coffee pot was split wide open clear down the end of the hall. Mr. Youngdale, the school janitor, came rushing up from the basement where he was filling the stoker. He saw the fire blow out of the electric blocks in the basement, and the fuses were all burned out. He said there was no doubt in his mind that the electrician didn't wire that stove properly. Well, two men from Consumers Power came along with electrical inspector from Traverse City and a licensed electrician, and they spent all day Saturday putting a brand new 100-amp service box and all new wiring clear back to the transformer on the power pole. When everything was back together, a new stove was ordered. State Farm wrote out a check for nearly $300 to cover the cost. Fire marshal said how lucky we were as the school could have been burned to the ground. Well, I know how lucky I felt when we sang that old hymn in church the next Sunday, which ends, "When the eye is on the sparrow and I know he watches over me." It suddenly made a deeper meaning in my life, and that is the truth.